Okay, this is Laura Dieter. She received her PhD in horticulture from the Ohio State University and is currently a full professor of horticulture at Ohio State ATI in Worcester, teaching a multitude of horticulture classes. She was awarded the ATI Distinguished Teaching Award twice, the OSU Alumni Award for Distinguished Teaching, the Perennial Plant Association Teaching Award, the American Horticulture Society Teaching Award, the Perennial Plant Association Service Award, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Ohio Landscape Association. She travels extensively around the country, speaking on a variety of topics. At home, she gardens on her 10th of an acre with her hubby, 3 dogs, 100 pink flamingos, which is why I put the flamingos on your introduction slide, and counts her 300 plus species of perennials as dear friends. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, good, because I have a brand new computer that I had to get like 2 days ago, and so you never know how they're going to behave. I had on my Facebook, new computer, who this? So, welcome everyone. I appreciate the invite this morning, and Thomas, I didn't mean to panic you this morning when I didn't quite log in early enough because I was trying to get my computer to play with Zoom. So we're good. We're here to go. So I would like to welcome everyone to the thoughts that go on in my mind when it comes to landscape design. I'm going to say this, that let me ask you a question. How many people in the audience have been to a museum? I'm going to guess everybody's been to a museum. And if you haven't been to a museum, you are aware that there are these things called museums, and they have art in them. But if you go to a museum, or you go to a botanic garden, or something like the Cleveland Botanic Garden, or you go to any public garden, you're going to walk around, and every once in a while, you're going to stop. And you're going to look at whatever that color combination is, whatever that plant combination is, or that piece of artwork on the wall. And you're going to go, wow, that speaks to me. And the person standing next to you is going to go, why in the world would you stop at that? That is the most hideous, awful thing I have ever seen in my entire life. So art is personal, and landscape design is also very, very personal. And I would like just to notice that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the rules. Excuse me. And I'm going to show you some pictures, and you might look at this and go, ew. And other people might go, wow. So art is very, very personal, and it is always what you make of it. And by the way, it's your yard. Your neighbors are already talking about you as those crazy plant people. So you might as well do what you want in your yard. All right, so the rules are here to help. And the reality is, when we're talking about rules, depending upon the book or the article or the textbook that you've gotten that you're looking at, these can be boiled down into about 5 or 6 different major areas. Sometimes they take them out to about 20 different areas. I try to condense things down to try to keep things a little bit more simple. I also want you to keep in mind that none of these is here by itself. So we can't talk about form without talking about line. We can't talk about line without talking about form, because everything in our gardens is 3-dimensional. We draw it in 2 dimensions. We draw it from a bird's eye view, and we look at pictures in 2 dimensions. But the reality is we see in 3 dimensions, and plants grow in 3 dimensions. So we always want to keep that in mind as we're, oh, there's something in the chat. Oh, okay. So Thomas and Amy, if there's something comes up that's a question, please feel free, folks, to ask questions in the middle of the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it, but if you guys can help me keep an eye on it as well, I would greatly appreciate that.
Will do.
Thank you. Okay, so when we talk about rules, one of the main things that we want to look at when it comes to our houses, for example, is the main feature of our house should be the entrance of the house. And we should try to do anything that we can to exaggerate the entrance of the house. And here, what we've got is circles. Human beings love circles. Oh my goodness, do we love to look at circles? We love to look at the center of circles. Our eye is automatically drawn to the center of circles. And so when we do circles, that pretty much exaggerates all the way to the entrance, because we want to look at the center. Oh, there's the next circle. Oh, okay, there's the door. The challenge we have, of course, is most of our modern houses have the garage as the main feature of the house. And so it's very difficult for us to emphasize where the main entrance is because the garage is the main feature. Anytime you've got a view, we want to use that line leading to the view. And if you've got a view and you're using line, give people something to look at. Clearly, we look at this, we've got lots and lots of things emphasizing the view up toward the center. And then if you look in the middle of that, right in the center again, you'll see kind of a standardized shrub. Behind that is kind of the door, behind the doorway there, that's actually the driveway. So they've kind of hidden that as well. And that's leading your view right up to the driveway there. So you always want to give people something to look at. If you have these extensive vistas, and I will tell you right now, you heard in the introduction, I have a 1/10 of an acre, a 1/10. My vista is the alley behind me. So it's not much of a vista. But if you have a larger property, you could take advantage of allays and viewpoints and then give people something to look at down at the end. Most of us may not have these huge properties for large areas, but you can drive views up and down depending upon the plants that you're utilizing. So here, look at the line for these conifers, because I look at these conifers and I think, well, they're kind of interesting. They're kind of cool. As a plant geek, I'm like, wow, ooh, what species is that? What cultivar is that? But what are they doing? They're driving our view up, because the reality is a lot of the rest of this land, I don't want to say it's boring, but a lot of the rest of this landscape is very simple. So let's force the view up and we get people looking around a little bit more. We can use line to emphasize pathways. So here you can see that the Hackanachoa, the little yellowish grass on either side of this pathway, just emphasizes the pathway. And what also it does when you change the line abruptly, you get people to stop. Watch people when they go to public places, particularly public gardens. If your lines are very, very straight and it's very similar on both sides, we tend to just walk straight through without really looking around a whole lot. In fact, it's probably worse than that. We've probably grabbed one of these and we're walking like this. We're not really paying a whole lot of attention. But when you abruptly change, whether that's you change by going around a corner or you change how the line looks, and here that abrupt change comes at the end of those little grasses, you stop. Your eye stops, you physically stop. You're forced to look around to see where to go. So sometimes abrupt changes can actually be a good thing. Utilizing the line of plants. And if you're a plant geek, how many people in the audience are plant geeks? I suffer from what I call CHAD, compulsive horticultural acquisition disorder. And I suspect that a lot of people in the audience also suffer from this particular disease. It's a great disease. I highly recommend it. There is no cure. We can claim that going to these programs is like the first part of a 12-step program, but I've actually never gotten beyond that. And that's okay. There are worse things to be addicted to. But if we take a look at the lines of these plants, everything in this image has a line. So everything from that giant, massive, spiky agave to the little orange poppies in front to the purple ice plant, everything is a little bit different. Oh, my dog has decided he's going to start singing in the background, so I'm sorry if he gets very loud. Use your line to frame things. And again, you might not have a large backyard, but we all have windows. Windows are a natural frame. And so we want to use those windows to frame a view to something. And not every window has to have a view, but places where you tend to look a lot. Maybe you have a large bay window in the front of your house. Utilize that. Give yourself something to look at when you look out the window. Maybe you spend a lot of time in your kitchen cooking or doing whatever, and there's a window there. Give yourself something to look at. Wherever you find a window that you're looking out a lot, that is a window that you can utilize as a frame. And so if you look at this particular image, we can see a frame here. We can see a smaller frame here. So there are several different places that people can look at in this particular image and have it framed by something. Where's your eye go? Oh, we go to the circles, those big pom-poms. Oh, then we're drawn to the center of that circle. So it's a circle that arrests our eye, but we've got a line, a straight line on the other side of that. And what have we done? We've given ourselves something to look at. So you might look at this and go, well, I don't really like those pom-pommy things. That's okay. You can put in anything that you want there. That's the great thing about design. You can watch HGTV. You can look on the internet. You can get garden magazines or books delivered and look at the pictures of things. And you can say, wow, that looks fantastic. That's in California. I can't do that here in Ohio. But you can take that picture and take it to a local garden center and say, replicate this with plants that we have here in Ohio. And they can do that for you. What we're trying to do is utilize line to generate interest. So this building back here is very brick wall, boring, utilitarian sort of building. It's the head house for a greenhouse. So it's a very utilitarian building. That brick takes up a lot of space. So what do? Let's drive that line up a little bit and block some of the view with the taller plants. And also those big, large leaves kind of stop your view. And now we're utilizing the line away from the building to drive our view toward the garden and not at the building itself. If we look at this particular garden, everything in this garden is about 2 to 3 feet tall. Our breeders have a love affair with 2 to 3 foot tall plants, and I don't know what it is. I need some little things, I need some medium things, and I need some big things. Don't be afraid of big, bold, bodacious plants, because they can be the exclamation points in our gardens. And if we take a look at this particular house, imagine it without that upright beech. And that is not to say that it's poorly cared for, poorly designed even. The plants are wonderful, but it's that beech that really drives our eye and allows us to stop and rest and go, wow, that's kind of cool. That's interesting because of that exclamation point. This is the garden for the plant geek, the person who's definitely a hortaholic. But look at the combinations of textures, because there's not a lot of color here. If I look in here, the colors are lots and lots of greens, a few yellows, and some little patches of purple here and there. So we've moved just a couple of colors through there. What's drawing your eye? The different textures and combinations of textures. So when you do big, bold, bodacious and little, tiny, fine, even the plant doesn't have to be little, tiny. This is not a tiny little plant. Okay, now I'm not like the end all be all of height. I'm well aware that there are jockeys taller than I am, but this is a big, tall plant. It's about 6 feet tall. And that banana in the background is getting into the 10 to 12 foot range. So these are big, bold, bodacious plants, but we're combining them such that the textures are vastly different. Utilize all seasons. I take a look at this and I'm like, there is that common Pfister juniper that, thank goodness, I don't really see a whole lot anymore. I don't have a problem with junipers. The problem I have with junipers is we tend to use them improperly and let them get out of hand. And a lot of our older cultivars got really large and they were not appropriate for our smaller landscapes. And they've done a really good job of breeding some newer cultivars, a little smaller, little more narrow, don't get so quite out of control. But look at the fall colors here. We always tend to forget that the light source changes in the fall, the colors change in the fall, things become a little bit more toned down, a little bit more relaxed. Texture. Oh my goodness, look at the texture on this chard. Isn't that amazing? And we've matched it with the color on this container. We've utilized the container that has this little fountain here, not as a fountain of water, but as a fountain of plants spilling out. So combine colors and then combine textures as well. And you will find that if you can think about 2 or 3 of those things that I had at the beginning, now we've got here color and texture. And that is a great way to start thinking about landscape design in a very simple way. And you don't have to think about, oh my God, how am I going to combine all of these different variables all at once? Combining 2 or 3, which is really easy for our minds to wrap around, is a fantastic way to start creating designs. And think like this here, think in vignettes. We have a great ability to look at something. But when I'm looking directly at something, in this case, I'm looking directly at my camera on my computer, I can see all of the other stuff around me. Like I can see my second monitor, I can see my stuff over here. But if I wanted to look, I'm going to have to do this. And I'm going to have to turn my head and look at something. So if you think of your garden as a series of vignettes, I have this little combination of plants, and here we have about 6 or 8 plants. And then I can see all of those plants, but I can't really see what's around it. But I'm going to scoot over a couple of feet and I'm going to see another vignette. And it's going to be maybe 6 or 8 different plants, or it might be 1 or 2 of the same plants, and then 4 or 5 different plants. You see what I'm giving you here? Permission to buy many, many plants, because you're going to repeat a couple of them throughout. But what you're doing is a series of vignettes that are going to stop the eye and create things that we can concentrate on and look at, because we can see a vista, but we can't really look at it until we're directly looking at that thing. And that's what you want to do. And it makes things a lot easier to kind of condense and coalesce. Utilizing upright spiky things is a fantastic way to draw the eye. Utilizing big, bold, bodacious things, utilizing pieces of artwork. So here in this particular shot, you can see that the color of the building has been brought down into the landscape within that little pergola area. So try to find places in your house or on your house that you can say, oh, I can match that color. I can match that shape. Maybe you have windows that have an archway in front. Maybe you've got a really nice roof peak that you could say, oh, I'd like to match that shape somehow in my garden. Bring that into the landscape. And that's another way to get things like repetition. It's another one of those words that we utilize. We always think repetition of plants, but we can actually repeat shapes or colors or artwork or plant forms or all kinds of different things. Repetition is actually pretty easy to get into landscape, because if you have a walkway, we don't usually do one color brick, then another color brick, and then a different brick, and then a different pattern. We do the same pattern. If you have a fence, it's the same pattern all the way around. So repetition is actually pretty easy, but we often don't think about trying to get something from the house into the landscape, if at all possible. I highly recommend you take a look at things from different angles. This is not the angle that this garden was meant to be viewed at, but it certainly gives us a different perspective, and it allows us to see things where maybe we like this area or don't like this area. So if you get a chance to look at your garden from above, or go across the street, go up the street a little bit, or really pay attention when you're pulling into your driveway, if you're looking at your front yard, for example, if your driveway is in the front, and see what other people see, because that's a really great way to get a new perspective on your garden. This is, again, repetition. We're pulling the color of the house into the driveway, the color of that walkway into the hardscape features, but maybe we don't want everybody to see everything. How have we blocked? The driveway actually goes down here. You can see this area right here is our driveway, and it goes down, and it's a really large feature of this house. So what have we done to arrest the eye? We've put a wall. And what have we done here to mimic this wall? We've used this color of this grass over on the other side to kind of repeat that. This happens to be in California, and it was one of the first times that I had seen a driveway where they were trying to use a little less hardscape on the driveway. It didn't happen to work very effectively, but I appreciate the effort that they tried. If you notice over here on the sidewalk area where you're going into the house, the grass is a lot more effective there because of the shade there. It happens to be a little bit cooler there, so the grass is working a little bit better. But I appreciate the effort that they were trying. Maybe you prefer a formal garden. So you can see here the line leading all the way down. It draws your eye down to that very fancy ending. Where are we getting repetition? Clearly the wall is repetition, but we're also repeating individual plants all the way down. So here's a plant, we're repeating it down here. We're repeating kind of large spiky things. We're repeating the color pink, 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 pink. Look down here, there's more pink. What have we done to do something different? To force people to slow down when they're on a straightaway? We've changed the color on the opposite side of this particular landscape. So it works out really, really well to draw your eye, to force you to want to walk all the way down there. If we had repeated the same groupings of plants over and over and over again, you wouldn't need to walk down to the other side of this garden, because you could just look at one area and go, oh, okay, it's the same thing. We sometimes take the rules of landscape design, and occasionally we don't really get them right. And I walk past a lot of designs and a lot of houses, and I go, what? Oh, well, that's different. If I look at this landscape, the hardscape is beautifully installed. There is absolutely nothing wrong with these plants. I don't even have a problem with the simplistic design, because I happened to take this shot very early in the gardening season. So it was, you can see the trees are just getting going. So I understand that it doesn't look full. I don't have a problem with that. I'm well aware that a picture of a garden is a 60th of a second snapshot of that garden on that day at that time. So if I'd come back in 2 months, the garden is going to look a little bit different. What the challenges I have with this is, here we have this straight, beautiful line, and we don't have anything to look at down here. Where did we put the focal feature? Over here. So we're not driving people into that garden. We're not driving their eye where it naturally wants to go. So if you're going to give people something to walk down, give them a reason to walk down there. I'm not sure what this is. I'm quite convinced this is probably a physician who hands out little blue pills or is addicted to their gas-powered hedge trimmers. But I see a lot, and I don't have a problem with the plants. I really don't. And I think it's extremely well maintained. If one likes their plants, you go here and you go here, don't touch. And that's fine. I look at this house and I say, okay, we're pulling these columns over here into these plants. The plants are well maintained. They're good plant selections. They're healthy. They're thriving in that area. So I can always find warm, fuzzy things to say about anything. But I look at this and I say, this is somebody who doesn't understand why they put the plants where they did. Every time you draw a circle on the paper for you're going to put a plant there, have a reason why it goes there. And I get it. Not everybody has an awful lot of money to go out and buy all kinds of cool plants. But I look at this garden and I say, why? Yuccas and daffodils. Nothing wrong with either plant. But why the combination of them? And I see this so many times. This is the American dream. Okay. Be realistic, Laura. Maybe they just spent the money on the hardscaping. This is all they could do. And if I came back in a couple of years, there would be more plants in there. But this is that classic hitchhiker's thumb that everybody seems to do. And yes, lots of times we need to go easy on the plants because we need to get our resources back available again. So I understand all of that. There's lots of things that might be in play as to why this landscape looks like this at this particular point. The hardscape's nicely done. The plant selection, the limited plant selection that there is decent plant selection. But when did the classic hitchhiker's thumb become the American dream? We've given people a bench. Okay, great. I don't have a problem with a bench, but what are they looking at? A lawn. There's no reason for them to look anywhere at this particular expanse of lawn, because I can tell you right now, that's all there is just a lawn. My friend sent me this because we're in a group about horticulture, and that's pretty much what I think this is. This is definitely somebody who's addicted to their gas-powered hedge trimmers. And I look at that, I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny, but why? Where is the rationale behind the different shapes in this? Could we have addiction to gas-powered hedge trimmers and still have a design that you're like, wow, that's kind of cool? Yeah, we could. And they didn't do that here. Okay, again, the 60th of a second, but none of this makes sense to me. Plants did not evolve in a sea of mulch, surrounded by 6 feet of mulch before there's another plant nearby. They evolve in communities. So they want to be together. They want to grow together and meld and blend together. And yes, I can see this is a relatively new install and these plants are expected to grow, but the plant choices here are not going to allow those plants to fill in a whole lot. And don't even get me started on how that little tree is planted. That poor thing's flare is buried so far underneath the mulch that we have set that poor tree up for failure right from the very beginning. But let's start talking about some of these other things. If we take a look at this particular bed over here, what is the function of this bed? It's not in view of the windows. It's not in direct line of anything. It's not, there's no reason for us to look at it. We have this straight walkway, and we do have at least something for them to look at as we're coming down the walkway, but it's not placed where it's taking advantage of this circle that we've developed right here. Take advantage of some of those things. If we had moved this stone feature, which is really cool, out just a little bit, we would take advantage of the line and take advantage of the parts of the circle that really want us to look in that particular area. Oh, how many times have you seen this? Nothing wrong with these. All of these plants are fantastic plants, but why would you take a plant that wants to be 10 feet across, which is really not very wide, and put it 6 inches from the house? Think of the mature size. And I know for us plant geeks, that is hard to do, because I'm going to buy a plant and it's going to be in this cute tiny little pot, and I'm going to bring it home and I go, okay, I know that's going to be 4 feet across, but right now it's only 6 inches across. So that means I got a couple of years before it's going to be 4 feet across. I should probably put more plants in there. So I'm guilty of that same thing. I cram things in where maybe I know in the future I'm going to have to pull things out, move things around. And that's why I like perennials over our woody plants sometimes, because the perennials are a lot more forgiving to being dug up and moved around. But the woody plants are the backbone of your garden. And those are the things that are going to hold your garden through the winter time when all of your herbaceous plants have mostly gone dormant at that point. Don't have a general problem with the concept here, but what is the function of the plants? Okay, sure, we've planted in groups of 3. All right, we've got that. Human beings like to see odd numbers, so we got that. But what is the function of this particular garden? Is it there so people don't run over the curb from a driveway? Because that's basically what this is. Well, then we need to round that off a bit more. Is it there so that we want to have something to look at? Well, give them something to look at. Give them something a little bit more interesting than 3 green, well, I would refer to these as landscape zits. Again, nothing wrong with the house, nothing wrong with the plants, but there's no cohesion between any of these plants. We've created a frame with the 2 weeping spruce. That's fantastic. We've created this frame, wonderful. And then we've kind of hidden the door with this really beautiful Japanese maple. We could move that Japanese maple over even a little bit more and hide the door completely. You've created a frame and then not framed things well by hiding parts of the picture, which is the front entrance to the house. My friend Sam, who sent me this picture, he's the head horticulturist at the University of Maryland. And he told their grounds crew that he wanted to plant some grasses in front of these electrical boxes to kind of hide them a little bit. And they came up with these little liriopes. And he sent this to me because if you look close, if I was the mowers for this area, I would be so upset because now I have to mow around this little guy, which is a oak leaf hydrangea I know is going to get big, and I've given it 8 inches. I've got this little ornamental, who knows, whatever that is right there. I've got a rock that I've got to mow around, and another oak leaf hydrangea, and a dozen liriopes that are going to get maybe a foot tall. That's not going to hide these things. What is the function of this? Work with the people who are trying to do whatever there is they're doing and give the plants the space to perform their function. So I look at this, I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny. Nothing wrong with the plants. It's the problem is how we combine them. Because we ask a lot of our plants. We want them to be pollinators. We want to use them for educating the next generation. Maybe we need them to screen things or be a foundation plant. Maybe we need to try to prevent the kids from running through the property. Maybe we're trying to send a message. Maybe we're doing cuttings. Maybe we're taking cut flowers. We want it to look good. Any reason that you have for being in the garden, and it could be, hey, I just like plants. We're asking a lot of these things that don't understand why we're putting them in there. That plant has one function as far as it's concerned, and that is to make more plants. That's why it flowers. So it doesn't care what we want it to do. It wants to do what it wants to do. So we ask an awful lot of our plants in our gardens. We ask them to be artwork. So here we have plants growing in containers where their roots are getting into the water. You'll notice on the back of that particular wall that we've got the staining, because that's actually a drip wall. So the water runs down where that staining is. You can see there's stairs right there. So we're looking at that garden from all different kinds of views. So we're asking a lot of these plants to hide that corner, to maybe hide some of the necessary wiring that happens when you have water gardens and water features. This case, these particular plants were asked to extend the fence. The HOA says your walls can only be X amount high. And these 2 neighbors didn't actually get along. So they found a cultivar of a juniper that would, from a visual perspective, extend the fence, except the homeowners only gave them, or the builder only gave them about 8 or 10 inches worth of garden. There are plants out there that will fit that situation. So here's junipers kind of visually extending the fence. Yes, of course, I can see right through those junipers to the house behind me. But from a very quick perspective, the function of those junipers is to give the appearance of raising the height of that fence just a little bit more. Here are plants being asked to be a waterfall. They're cascading along the water just like the water is itself. We ask them to advertise. Even Ohio State does this. We ask them to grow in patterns. That means somebody has to come along and maintain this to keep this pattern, but we're asking them to grow in patterns. We ask them to grow as topiary. You know, this is not an easy thing for a plant to do. It wants to get bigger and bigger, and we're going to prune it to maintain this particular shape. This is a lot of maintenance for somebody. So this is a lot of maintenance, not just in terms of keeping the plants this shape, but also keeping them well watered. And a lot of times these are actually watered from the inside because they'll grow in a moss, a sphagnum based moss on a wire frame. And so you can actually open these up, set a sprinkler on the inside, and it waters everything from the inside of these sorts of things. I took this was in, where was I? I was in Montreal, and I was just kind of wandering around downtown, and they had this kind of going there. And I don't know why there would be a killer whale in the middle of downtown Montreal, but I still thought it was really cool. We repurpose things that we don't want to get rid of. And then we ask our plants to grow in containers, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I tend to look at any container that has a hole in it. Anything that has a hole in it, as far as I'm concerned, I can put plants in that. And so we're asking them to grow in places that they don't necessarily expect to grow. We ask them to be beautiful. We ask them, we say, oh, I just want to look at all the different colors and all the different forms. We ask them to be these massive displays. And we look at this and we go, oh, that's so amazing. So we're asking a lot of our plants. This planting was sending a message. So this was taken, I took this several years ago, actually. This was at NC State Arboretum. And the AIDS quilt at the time had just made a tour as it was touring the country, and it had stopped at NC State for a while. And so they had displayed the AIDS quilt, and they wanted to kind of continue that theme. So they took a section of the garden and they turned it into a quilt. So here, not only are these plants being asked to grow in a pattern, but they're being asked to grow in a pattern that represents something else, that represents something to us. And I thought that was kind of a really cool way to send a message with plants. And these plants are sending a message back to us. We won't talk about which finger they're using, but they're definitely sending a message back to us. So you might have seen this online, but I got to visit the gentleman whose garden this is. He lives right on the American-Canadian border on the Canadian side. This is out in Vancouver. And so he lives in on the Canadian side. And he's a big plant breeder, and he has all kinds of different plants. So this garden and this little gnome, he had this commissioned because the Americans on the other side apparently were very much into guns. And there's very large properties. So the Americans apparently had a gun range on their property and spend a lot of time firing their guns, which the Canadian felt was a little bit of disturbing the peace sort of thing, but there wasn't anything you could do about it because not only was it far enough apart, but it was technically two different countries that you're talking about. So he had this little gnome commissioned, and it's pointing right at his American neighbors. And I just thought this was kind of funny and cute. Learning gardens. This is at Tennessee, where they utilize their gardens for learning. So students design, students install, and then students maintain. And the best thing about learning gardens is it means there's going to be failures. So if you were to come to the gardens at Ohio State ATI and the Worcester campus where I work, you'll find that we've got some areas that are fantastic and some areas that don't work. And the grounds crew always says, oh, we got to clean that up because it didn't work. I'm like, don't do that. I want students to see that not everything always goes perfect, and that's okay. We see pictures of perfect gardens. We see the museum artwork. We don't always get to see that it doesn't always work, but I can guarantee on your property, you've thought of something, you went and planned it out. You're like, I can see this in my mind. You bought the plants, you've been caring for them. And Mother Nature goes, hey, you know what? We're going to be 110 billion degrees outside today, and all your plants are going to wilt, and there's nothing you can do about it. Or you're going to get 5 inches of rain in 2.5 hours, and there's nothing you can do about it. Mother Nature loves to play jokes on us gardeners. So it's okay if things don't work. You can learn from that. The thing that we ask of our plants is to help us learn about nature, help us learn about the environment, and help us learn about plants. If you want to get into design and into front yards and do something weird, find a shape. Shapes are another great way to look at gardens, and in this case, you can clearly see that the shape here is going to be rectangles. And what are we asking of these plants? We're asking of these plants to grow in water or around water or near water so that the humans who love to listen and look at water can have that tranquility and that peace of mind. Here, this was at the former SeaWorld, and I thought this was kind of interesting because there's a shark topiary in the middle of that, as you can clearly see that. There's a shark topiary there, and then they chose red underneath there. So when my children were little, we took them to SeaWorld, and I'm like I'm bending over, looking into the garden, and my daughter is rolling her eyes at me at the time. She's like, Mother, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm looking for the dead body. Clearly, that's the message they're trying to send here, right? Could we have picked a different color for the sharks to be swimming in? Blue, maybe? We want to get people outside. We want to give them places to sit. What have we done here? We've created a circle. Human beings love circles. The circle says slow down. And we violated the rule of the circle just a little tiny bit by placing a rock right in a place where you wouldn't normally think to have a rock. But that also says sit here at the edge of the circle and contemplate and slow down. And this was at an office park. Doesn't have to be complicated. This happens to be in California, but we could easily replicate this with different plants. Those are crepe myrtles, but we could do this with dogwoods. We could do this with red buds. There's lots and lots of small things. Their little evergreen hedge in the back, they use rosemary, like we use taxus and yews and junipers. So that happens to be a rosemary hedge in the back, which I was like, oh my God, ooh, ah, wow, that's fantastic. And they're like, yeah, it's just rosemary. But look how simple this is. And yet it completely exaggerates the fact that there's a circle there. And we find those things very pleasing. Lawn replacements, we ask our plants sometimes to be lawn replacements. So here is a native sedge being utilized in an area where the slope is a little bit dangerous to put a mower. So here's a plant that doesn't have to be mowed. Where do we draw our inspiration for these things? Any place. You can get inspiration anywhere. Could be from a book, from the internet, from talking to somebody, from going to a public garden, and you can bring those ideas and concepts into your garden. This person happened to buy an old mill house, an old mill, and renovate it for their home. And so there's all these millstones. And I'm like, you lucky dog, you have 1,000 of these things just laying around, because as the business would use them and wear them out, they would just kind of toss. And so they have all these millstones. And so everything in the garden is designed to utilize these as pieces of artwork. Utilize anything you can. So here's an old container, and it's kind of a rusty old thing. Rust is a very natural color. So what have we done? We've used rusty old plants to put in there. So match your colors where you can. If color is something that you can think of, great. And if your container is like, well, I don't know what colors to put in this, take the container shopping with you. If the container is large like this one is, take a picture of the container and take that shopping with you. Hold your phone up to the plants. Oh, I like that. Nope, not getting that plant. So if you take your container shopping with you, or pictures of the container, you can then determine which colors go well in that particular container. Leaves. Just remember that with the exception of some of our annuals, when it comes to our perennials, they're going to have mostly leaves for most of the season that we're looking at them. So find plants where the leaves are really, really cool and utilize those plants, because those leaves are going to look like that all season long. And those annuals, these are mostly annuals. So they'll come in, they'll look like this most of the season. But if you were to put this as perennials, they would be in and out of flower at different times. So if you imagine replicating this in a garden situation, you've got different pockets of places where you can put your perennials, and you've got different areas where you could look. For those of you who are asking, this is woolly sage, Salvia argentea, which is a mostly hardy biennial. If we get a very, very cold winter with no snow, this probably won't make it. It's officially a zone 6, which I get that most of Ohio is reclassified as a zone 6, but sometimes our weather doesn't cooperate. If we get those bitterly cold days and we don't have snow, this probably won't survive. Or if we have a really wet winter, and I don't mean wet as in lots and lots of snow, because that's actually not a bad thing for plants. Wet, rainy sort of winter where the water just sits there a lot. This might not make it over the winter, but it doesn't matter, because you really only want the first year leaves, because the second year the leaves are really, really tiny, and then the plant bolts and sends up this classic salvia stem with these beautiful white flowers that smell like 1,000 cats have decided to utilize your garden as a litter box. So you don't want this thing flowering. Go ahead and just buy it. Treat it more like an annual. The leaves are really, really cool. Get kids involved. Man, take them to the garden center and buy these gourds and get them to paint them up and make birdhouses, even if the birds are like, I'm not living there. What are you talking about? Because kids love color. I remember when my kids were little and they were like, Mom, why are all the houses always painted the same colors? How come nobody paints their house purple? Kids love color. It's about getting color and various bright colors. First off, it has special meaning for us because we've gotten kids involved. And second off, they always like to do colorful things. Oh, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable. That's unfortunate. Okay, let me know if I cut in and out. I don't know what I would do about it, but let's hope. I'm gonna cross my fingers that things work for the next half an hour or so. 20 minutes, I guess, is what I've got. Have fun. Maybe you don't have the yard good enough for a little caterpillar like this, but you probably have some fun things that you can do. You can do fun things in containers. You can get out some artwork. I happen to have pink flamingos, and so all the kids in the neighborhood love walking by and do the pink flamingos. Here's one of them. This is a really wonderful piece of sculpture that I then utilize and put some pink flowers in. So find fun ways to do things in the garden, because that's going to attract other kids. Maybe you don't want fun. Maybe you can't think of, I don't want to say you don't want fun. You want fun. But maybe you can't think of a way to start. Start with a color. Start with a very simple color. Everything here has white flowers or white variegated foliage. And that's a great way. So then you can go to the garden center, you say, I need lots and lots of white flowers in the spring, white flowers in the summer, white flowers in the fall. And now you've got a monochromatic garden. And that can actually be quite interesting. We can do it almost all foliage. Now, yes, this is indoors, but we can mimic this outside with things that are very spiky or with silver foliage. You can see there, they're matching the color of the walkway that goes to that area. So we can do all kinds of things. Do it on a smaller scale. So here, everything again, silver or white flowers. There's maybe 3 plants in there. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You can do it on very small, remember, vignette scale. Same thing, small scale vignette. So we've drawn our inspiration from a color. Here, this was at the Worcester campus a couple of years ago, and we drew our inspiration for some of our gardens from paintings. So all of us picked out a painting that we really liked, and then we went and we bought plants that matched the colors or the feeling of that particular painting. Notice we weren't trying to replicate the painting. We were trying to replicate the colors in the painting. Do you have a favorite piece of artwork? Utilize that in the landscape. So a few more rules that help people think about things. We like groups of 3 or multiples of 3. So we tend to say, oh, always plant in odd numbers. So 5 is a great number, but 6 is also not a bad number because 6 is a multiple of 3. No acute angles. And yes, I know mathematically there's a definition for an acute angle, but basically what we're trying to avoid is things like this. Little tiny angles like this. It's really hard to plant in those little corners. It's really hard to get hardscapes that function well in those little corners. So try to avoid those sorts of things. Break your yard up into thirds, whether it's a 2/3 lawn and 1/3 garden, although I personally would prefer 2/3 garden and 1/3 lawn. Think of things as if you've got a rectangular yard, breaking it up into thirds and placing things into thirds, because that helps us reduce the maintenance. It's also easier on our eyes, and we understand those sorts of things. And what I mean by even steps is keep your steps the same size. If you're utilizing stairs, keep your stairs the same size. And if you're using flagstone for the steps and naturalistic stone for the steps, it's really difficult to do because those kind of naturally come in different sizes. But if you, particularly with public gardens, or if you're going to open up your home to other visitors, or if you've got a part of your garden where you want people coming into the yard and looking at your different flowers, you want them walking on fairly even steps. Otherwise, we tend to trip. Our minds see evenness when it comes to stairs, but that doesn't mean they're actually even. So here's an interesting group of 3, because groups of 3 don't always have to be next to each other. So here's 1. The obvious one is over here, but the 3rd is in the back. So they don't necessarily have to be next to each other as long as the main viewpoint shows that group of 3 right in our line of sight. Violate those rules. Where's the group of 3? The group of 3 here is 1, 2, 3 containers. Notice they're not the same size, but they're different colors. So we violated that group of 3 a little tiny bit, right? We've got spiky plant, spiky plant, spiky plant. So we're still got working in tens of groups of 3, but your first thought is, whoa, that seems to violate all the rules because everything seems to be in 2s. Look closer and you'll see there are some groups of 3 there. This violates every rule of every known order that I could possibly imagine, and I still found it interesting, unusual, but interesting. I don't personally like the groups of 2s here, but that's my personal thing, and you might look at that and go, oh wow, that violates that rule of 3, and I really like what they've done here, and that's perfectly fine. There's a great example of an acute angle that works because water gets into those acute angles really, really easily. Now, the violation of the rule here is here we've got a pathway that we want people to walk on in an area where water is splashing on it. So there actually was some signs all over, and you can kind of see it down here. Be careful if you're going to walk on it because it's kind of slippery, which I was kind of hoping to see people fall in because that would be funny. But the water's not very deep. It's only a couple of inches, but we've also got large enough rocks on there where you could walk very comfortably. And I will say, this is one of the few adults that walked on there, but there were lots and lots of kids playing on this area. Same thing here. Give the people something to play on, to climb on. The adults were not climbing on this, but it got the kids into the garden because they were the ones paying attention to the different sizes. Here's what we're talking about steps. If you are in a downtown area and you're looking at steps, where am I going to walk up the steps to the next level? I'm going to walk here where the steps are even. Over here, these steps are not even and nobody's going to walk on these steps. But what is the function? Look what we've done here. We've drawn the steps into the next area of the landscape and they're leading our eye back over here where we've changed the color and texture of our hardscape to give us something to look at. So we're drawing our eye away to a different area and give us a reason to walk over to that area of the landscape. Garden in places where we don't garden very often. Americans, for whatever reason, don't use window boxes. But the advent of a lot of the irrigation systems, and I thought they did a pretty decent job of hiding this one. Yes, it's clearly visible if you look, you can see the irrigation system right there. But those irrigation systems also mean that it's a lot easier to get water to these sorts of things than it used to be. Here's a green wall. And I get it. Not everybody's going to put a green wall on the side of their house, but we normally think of green walls as the tiny, tiny little plants. Well, those are hydrangeas. This also had dogwood shrubs, larger plants that you might not necessarily expect. So again, violating the rules of what we think of as a green wall is supposed to be. But that just made me giggle. So I thought that was rather enjoyable. Grow things in containers. Containers are a fantastic way to pretend we live in a different area with different soil, because I can put whatever soil I want into a container. I can have containers that have water in them. Now, you might think, okay, but I'm not going to put a water container in my garden because in Ohio, that's just going to be a mosquito breeding place. The little dragon in the background, if you see right here, he's actually a spitter. So on, then that causes the water to be what's the word I'm looking for? It causes the water movement. Can't think of the word right now. Causes water movement. Thank you. Stagnant. Thank you. That's the word, exactly that word I was looking for. So we're causing non-stagnant water, and therefore the mosquitoes won't be there. Also, if you think you haven't turned it on in a couple of days or you left it overnight, dump it out. Let it fill back up again. Containers are great ways to get our houseplants back outside. Houseplants love being outside in the summertime. You know, and those are fairly large containers, so maybe you're not bringing those particular ones inside, but dig the plants back up and put them in the smaller containers to bring them inside to kind of overwinter them. I don't know about you, but I overwinter my house plants by going, please survive, please survive, please survive. Just deal with it for a few months. I promise I'll put you back outside. You can grow a garden in anything. Got a busted wheelbarrow, tip it over, put some plants in it. Don't you like the green wall, but don't have an entire wall or don't want to give up an entire wall? This is a relatively new trend in our plants, and that is growing them in pictures. And yeah, these plants are going to outgrow their location, and that means, you know what we can do? We can put them on the compost pile where they'll always be with us, little bits of them anyways, and we can get new plants, or we can prune them to keep them smaller so that they stay in this for a couple of years. I thought this was a really cool downtown display of artwork. This artist, this one was called Changing Channels, and they just took a bunch of old TVs and utilized them as containers and put a bunch of little low-growing sedum and things like that in it. So I thought that was an interesting piece of artwork. Shoes. We always see shoes and hens and chicks. I don't know where that started, but here this person clearly has a bunch of random individual shoes and started putting all kinds of different plants in them. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so one day I made one of these, and then I put a black obsidian heuchera corabells in it, and that sat on my front porch for a while. I just used duct tape and plastic, and these are paper towel tubes that I utilized there to create those. And my kids had fun with this one. Prune things. They don't have to be, natural. They can be fun. I'm not a huge fan of this, but it serves a purpose as far as a fence is concerned. Anybody who's been to Longwood knows that they have these wonderful, amazing pruned areas there, chickens and chairs, and you can dogs, all kinds of cool things. So these have been there for hundreds of years. When people say you have to prune your taxes into a natural shape, no, you don't. I would like chickens. I'm going to prune my taxes into chickens. If you go online and you look up pruning and topiary, you'll find people doing all kinds of really cool things. Pruning can make plants look a lot more formal, that's for sure. And this was a very formal area of this particular garden. And look what we've done with the line. We've drawn the line down, and we've exacerbated view by putting a piece of artwork there. That could be a plant. I'm doing some sort of hardscape type of artwork. We don't think of specialty pruning in this country a whole lot. Now, this also is at Longwood, and this is utilizing these trees as a living wall. So creating a room and utilizing the trees as a wall. These trees are pruned basically in a straight line and created a wall like this. We do know espalier. We grow oftentimes our fruit trees as espalier. So we have seen some of these sorts of things. And so that's a little bit more common for us. I'm not sure what these are. These are little puff balls, but they make a great backdrop for this outdoor seating area. And so keeping them kind of more formal looking it works really well in this kind of more formal looking artistic garden. It literally was a handicap parking spot. And so I thought I would change the sign because I'm not sure what they were trying to do here. Take a plant that we normally don't think of and espalier that. So here's a very young Atlas cedar being grown as an espalier, and clearly not the same garden, but the same concept with a much older plant. Yes, this is going to take time. This is not maintenance free, that's for sure. But it gives you a way to get some verticality and do something a little bit different in our gardens. This violates every rule of pruning I can possibly think of, but I thought it was really, really cool. And it was very clear where you wanted to walk to the yard. So there's your sidewalk, as you can see. And we also have another view that we're driving by utilizing lines of plants on both sides. And we're giving them something to look at back here with these really cool kind of Italian cypress back here. These, I wouldn't necessarily recommend these. These are barberries, which I thought was a very unusual choice for the front of a walkway, but certainly might prevent people from walking up to your steps if they wanted to try to grab those plants, that's for sure. English ivy. English ivy. Definitely a plant that a lot of times we're like, no, don't plant that. That's horribly aggressive. And yeah, you probably have to go out and prune every 16 seconds with this thing, but it's kept it under control and kind of making a nice little statement on that garden. And if we look at color theory, then you've got both red and green, which is a really nice analogous color scheme. I think this person had too many glasses of wine when they went out with their electric head shears, or they really, really, really like Cat in the Hat. They're a Dr. Seuss fan and they wanted something funny and silly in their garden. This is Graceland. And I look at these and I'm like, you guys need to like change your plants a little bit. But this is actually, if you think about it, this is kind of actually the classic pruning that we would see in the 70s, where everything is pruned down. So the bottom portions of the plants always died because the upper portions of the plants were shading them. You always want to prune out this way, or minimum very, very straight. But straight is difficult for us to do. So if you prune out at a little bit of an angle, then your upper portions of your plant won't be shading the lower portions of your plant. However, if it makes you happy, I say go for it. Do you want the latest and greatest? Do you want that are common things? You know, you want to look at hardscapes. You want to look at all kinds of different things as far as your plants are concerned. So find plants that you like, big, bold, bodacious plants, spiky things that are going to be really, really cool. Look at new colors that are coming on. So what if this thing only performs for one season? You know what? Your begonias are only going to perform for one season as well. There's no reason then that you can't have something else next year. And if it survives, great. Plant death is the opportunity to shop for new plants. So never feel guilty. You get to buy new friends then. Common things grown in a very traditional manner that really look fantastic when grown together. I had never, ever seen poof ball hydrangeas growing in a hanging basket like this. But man, I thought that was absolutely fascinating. This is a disease. And I thought this was really, really cool. So this is Hosta virus X. This was at a private garden. So this is Hosta virus X. And this plant can live with this virus for years and years and years. And then you could just tell people you have a plant that nobody else has. This was also at Longwood. And so this was their bathroom area. And so green walls, like you said, maybe you're not going to do a whole wall, but you might be able to take a section of this. Artwork, stone is fantastic artwork. And look what we've done. We've used the circle again as a place to look, a place to stop, and a place that we want to stare at. Stairs clearly move people. So give people the opportunity to look, to stop, and to look around in your various areas. And when we have landing areas, now we build our stairs and our landings because we don't want to go straight up because it would be too many stairs. So landings give us a place to start and to stop and to look around. We're doing it for practical purposes, but the end result can also be artistic. Stairs in a water feature. We want to look up, and we're trying to give something in the back. Now it was really, really hot when we were there in this particular garden. So these plants didn't look fantastic. But the nice thing about this is we've given them something to look at, but it's also, if we were to open the blinds, now we've got something to look at from the inside as well. Putting artwork on the walls. There's a window basket without a window because it's being utilized as the artwork. Look for patterns. Look for ways you can change the pattern. And sometimes it doesn't have to be random. It can be, hey, we're doing this because this is kind of cool. We're changing a pattern. When we change a pattern, visually that creates two separate areas for our eyes. Look for patterns on our plants. Mother Nature has given us some wonderful patterns and wonderful things to look at. When we look up close at things, when we really look up close at Gerbera daisies, we can see all the little intricate parts of them. Look at in the winter time, the really kind of Halloween-y look for things. We can see the structure of our perennials outlined in the snow. We find those early flowering things that don't even care that it's snowing. We find the early spring things that just make us smile. You know what? I know pansies are common, and they are one of my favorite plants because I love their little smiley faces. Find different seasons, different lines, ways to move people, ways to plant plants in places that you wouldn't think of, plants that can handle those tough spaces. Look up close at things. And as we come into fall, find things that excite you, find ways to make it look for things, utilize light. And finally, you're already being made fun of by your neighbors. You've already spent all your money. Your back is sore. Your knees don't work. You can't get the dirt out of your fingernails. You've fussed, you've worried, you've yelled, you maybe are swearing. Maybe you're drinking an extra glass of wine because the plants are not doing the things that you want. But please have fun in your garden this year. Gardeners are the most hopeful people on the planet because, hey, next year, next week, next season, tomorrow, next hour, it will be better. And I know that we always go, oh, my garden is so terrible. View it with the eyes of your neighbor, because I can guarantee your neighbor doesn't see all of the challenges that you have in your garden. They see the beauty that you've created. So as we move into the gardening season and as spring is right around the corner, try even for just a couple of minutes to see the beauty that you've created in your gardens. Thank you very much for your time.
Eric Draper is our second speaker. He has been the commercial horticulture educator for the Ohio State University Extension of Geauga County, located in Burton, Ohio, for the past 26 years. One of Eric's major emphasis and specialties is to actively use, teach, develop, and refine all critical thinking skills necessary to diagnose biotic and abiotic plant disorders. Eric loves and is devoted to using the science of phytoforensics. As a commercial horticulture educator, Eric also conducts research in Wooster, Ohio, on crab apples, evaluating the impact of multiple diseases, insects, bloom timing, and duration on the overall impact of whole plant aesthetics. Eric has a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science from Utah State University. He has written numerous articles regarding trees, plant diagnostics, and sensible pruning for the American Nurseryman and Fine Gardening magazines. Thank you, Eric, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Amy. Thanks, Tom, for this opportunity. Yes, I made up some of those words, phytoforensic, of course.
I practiced.
Yeah. So, but this to me is the game which I so love. The plant diagnostics, that's what this is all about. And if you have plants, then you almost always will have and experience that opportunity. So with this, it's really about observational analytics. Here's your first opportunity. Do you see something a little different in this? I hope you do. Critical thinking becomes really key in all of this, and analyzing in your mind, well, why is this different than that? Is this really, I've got some examples, and hopefully together we'll have that opportunity to see that and have a little test yourselves on it to see how you did and what you did. All right, with that, you also have the opportunity to detect possible patterns in plant damage. Do you see patterns there? Probably you're going crazy watching them begin to spin. But don't be overwhelmed by it all. This is the greatest game in the world. And really the only way you get better is by doing it, all right? So making those mistakes, there's no crying for diagnostics, no crying at all. So it would be simple if we could say, you know what? Plant diagnostics, 2 steps, simple. Number 1, determine the problem. So I make that diagnosis and then present the management options available. Wow, done. It's not that simple. And often there are so many nuances of it, but that's what makes it so much fun, so great. So we have obvious problems, things like this. Of course, this is very simple. You come out and this is what it looks like. You now know, of course, this is Japanese beetle. And that's easy to detect. This is also what Japanese beetle does to linden leaves. This is kind of classic pattern, a feeding pattern of these beetles. The leaves, whether they've got favorite plants, roses, grapes, lindens, or some of their favorite feeding plants. So, but they are one of the true ubiquitous feeders, cosmopolitan feeders, not just host plant relationship, but they tend to nibble on a lot of things. So if it was simple, that simple as saying, oh, obvious problem. Well, how about this? Is it obvious? I sure hope so. You say, well, that's not problem. You can actually see where it's literally tipped that root ball up out of the ground. Probably too much foliage. They didn't have it staked right. Other obvious problems. Somebody forgot to take off the brace, the wire ties. So we also have things such as ongoing issues with mulch. Is this good? A little is good. If a little is good, a lot is a whole lot better. No, that's not true in this instance. We don't want this mulch up here. And you say, okay, that's 1 or 2 plants were good, but in this instance, you can see they were dedicated to getting this done the way they wanted to get it done and see it their way. Well, what about the obscure? That's easy when it's simple and straightforward. What about something like this? This bark splitting on many of our thin bark trees, cherries, maples. So the question then becomes, is it physical injury? Is it pest damage? Can it be disease? How about root damage, freeze frost damage, growth regulator damage, or is it something else? Could it be all of these? Yes, it could. And this is where things get frustrated, because in our world, things are not typically 1 and 1 equals 2. In the world of plants, 1 and 1 equals 5. So in that, we also have an additional pressure. Why are the plants dying? People want answers immediately. Now, we got to have them now, which adds another burden, another layer of pressure that we feel, and resulting in sometimes desperate diagnostics. You say, oh, if I hold this, it'll tell me, or maybe not. It may not tell you. Things just keep rolling along. The number one rule for diagnostics is don't make symptoms fit a comfortable diagnostics. We tend to become comfortable as people, and even diagnosticians saying, hey, I know what that is. This is what this is. We have to be careful. We always have to step back and say, is that what I'm really seeing? So what we really want to do is make the diagnosis, our diagnosis, fit all the observed symptoms, all the symptoms, everything that we're seeing. That becomes critical. And we did this ourselves. For example, what was our diagnosis in 2001? Here's a large ash tree dying. In 2001, this was pretty synonymous. We saw ash trees dying all over. They died all the time. We even made up some terms, cumulative stress syndrome of trees, to explain why these trees in Toledo, up north in Detroit, why were they dying? And they do that all the time. But then a switch flipped in our minds, and we saw something that wasn't quite right. We know that the native ash borer creates these round holes. Somebody finally went up and saw something beyond what they typically expected, that suddenly we went from round holes to D-shaped exit holes. And suddenly, wait, none of our native borers make D-shaped exit holes. So the switch was flipped, and it was determined that we had an exotic a bug called the emerald ash borer. And that emerald ash borer then set us up for other issues. So now the question becomes, with these plant problem diagnostics, we always have to fight our own tendencies. With this, how can we make sure, how do we make sure that how do we increase our chances of getting it right? Well, we need to ask the right questions. Well, sometimes it's as simple as, also making a statement, keep calm. I don't know what it is. And that's all right, because what you do as master gardeners, I'll collect additional information and I'll find out. I'll gather as much information as I can and I'll find out. So everybody said, why does it take 20 questions? Well, when you go to the doctor, you're sick. Do you just hand him your fingernail and say, what's wrong with me? No. What does the doctor do? The doctor then says, well, I know what it is. You're this. No. Usually he wants you to take some tests. Have you ever wondered why? Why the test? You say, oh, I know. It's not to make money. That's not the issue. The issue is to clearly eliminate what's creating problems for you, eliminate what it isn't with those tests in order to tease apart and determine what is the real problem. So Joe Boggs, Jim Chatfield, and I, we were all bouncing ideas when we found out that we were all doing the same thing. We pulled them together into the 20 questions of plant diagnostics. And so here's the first 10 questions that we asked. And we kind of sat down and said, look, when we go out on a site, this is what we do. This is how we deal with it. These are the questions that are going through our minds. So the objective of asking the 20 questions is actually to learn how to diagnose plant problems. We want to focus on this diagnostic process. That's what we're about. The questions are listed in a logical sequence. So at least logical according to Boggs, Chatfield, and Draper. So the questions are listed in a logical sequence, but they're also logical groups of questions. And we'll show you what I mean. So the first group is, what is the plant? What is normal for the plant? What are common and or specific problems for the plant? So these are plant specific questions. We want to know the plant. For example, what's the plant? You start with an accurate ID. Once you know the plant, you begin to then move forward with an accurate plant problem ID. Because in your mind, the idea that no plant ever, just certain plants have problems, that's not true. All plants have an Achilles heel. All plants have problems. And the more that you are exposed to plants and deal with plants, you begin to categorize certain tendencies, certain problems with certain species, even species of plants. This is a challenge. This is spruce pine, North Carolina. But then it's okay. The question is, people say, is it a spruce or a pine? And the first thing that typically comes back for master gardeners, oh yeah, it's a spruce pine. Well, that makes things a little bit of a problem. So what's normal for the plant? That's the first. Once you identify it, what's normal for that plant? We have natural senescence, deciduous conifers. We've got taxodiums here, bald cypresses. Bald cypress, we also have beautiful, beautiful metasequoias, dawn redwoods. These are deciduous conifers. They drop their leaves every year. However, there's also a sequence of unnatural senescence of dead conifers. This used to be a blue spruce. This is not natural for some, most of our conifers, but many of the deciduous conifers have been cut down in the name of, well, it died last year and dropped all its leaves. Many people moving in don't realize that there are deciduous conifers. So common problems or specific problems, often it's relative to the family, the genus, and the species. For example, common problems. Here's a bacterial blight. This is Erwinia amylivera, which we call fire blight, on pear, on crabapple, and on hawthorn. So pear, crabapple, hawthorn are all within what family? They all belong to the Rosaceae family. And only plants in the Rosaceae family are susceptible to fire blight. So if somebody comes up and says, well, I've got a maple tree and I swear I have fire blight on it, you can be pretty confident that the maple, sugar maple, is not in the Rosaceae family. Unfortunately, 70% of the plants in the landscape are part of the Rosaceae family, but there's only a handful that really cause us problems, but they are understanding in the back of your mind, Rosaceae family, there are these issues that face that family. How about things such as anthracnose? Anthracnose is a fungal disease, note the difference, that seems to run along the veins, cause necrosis on the veins of the plants. Here's what it looks like the other way, not looking through the leaf, but there are also, you have this is the triggering system. You have the presence of the fungus, you have a cold, wet spring, and young succulent tissue. So cool, wet weather, young succulent tissue, presence of the pathogen, wham, we end up with anthracnosis. That was maple anthracnose. This is beech anthracnose. Again, note they tend to run along the veins, stays limited to the veins. Oak anthracnose and the ash anthracnose. So all these anthracnoses, there's about 40 different types. They all have that same criteria. Young succulent tissue, cool, wet weather, and a susceptible host. When the pathogen comes in, we're going to have anthracnose, but it's not typically a problem. So our next sequence, what do you see that looks abnormal? What is the overall health of the plant? And what exactly do you see? So we're looking at the symptom. What's going on? What am I seeing? So we want to know what looks abnormal. Are there missing leaves? Are there holes in the leaves? Are there off-colored leaves? Are the leaves small? They seem really small. They don't typically see that way. Scorched leaves, branch dieback. Is there frass or ooze? Abnormal growth, cankers, even rotting or missing roots. These are all things that's not normal. So what looks abnormal? Well, this is a bur oak cup that is this here. It's not that there's a problem. This is what bur oak cups look like right up on the top above the fruit, the nut itself. That's normal. That's abnormal. That's really abnormal. But we have situations like this. 2 trees planted same time next to one another. Here's one, here's the other one. Suddenly, this one is going chlorotic, losing the chlorophyll. It's going yellow. Typically, when this happens, we start thinking about, we use terms chlorosis, which is the lack of chlorophyll. But note with iron chlorophyll, we typically have, it looks like somebody used a real tiny Sharpie marker, a little fine point, and outline the veins. So we get this chlorosis, this intervenal chlorosis. But then we also have things such as this, which is the manganese deficiency. You can see the differences. It looks like somebody took a highlighter and outlined the veins. You see those differences between these two? Ultimately, at a certain level, the tissue between the veins begins to break down. It's a lack of nutrients. And typically those nutrients are moved up in the water stream. And people first jump is, oh, I know what that is. You don't have it in the soils. Well, as master gardeners, if you believe that maybe it's not in the soil, you say, well, what do? Soil test, right? You take a soil test. But it's not necessarily that the soil lacks that nutrient. pH also has an influence on availability of that nutrient. Soil moisture also has an influence. It can also interference with the vascular flow. It may be that you have problems with your roots. You have a girdling root, problem with the stem or branches. Something is limiting. All you can say is something is limiting the connection between the root and the shoot. That's all we can say until we tease it apart. We tease it apart using going and doing a soil test, also looking at the plant tissue, and we begin to correlate what's going on. So you got an answer? What do you think is going on here? This is a real question. You're saying, oh yeah, we just saw this, Eric. I got this one. Well, you always have to pay attention. You always have to read the signs. You got the answer what that is? Huh, it's normal. That's rough. It's just normal on this plant. So what's the overall health of the plant? Our plant can't really talk to us. Sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees. But the realities are we want to step back and look and evaluate some of these things. Compare it to a healthy specimen. One of the key aspects here is to be able to, right here, this is the terminal bud. And every year we have this twig extension, and then this terminal bud, the apical bud, develops on these bud scales. The scales are coverings that cover over that bud, the leaf tissue inside. Every year we get what are called annular rings. These annular rings make up and help us to know what we can do that helps us to be able to see in a year's growth. We can say, all right, between last year, these annular ring scars, and this year, this is what we got in 1 year. Well, the tree can talk to us if you know how to listen to it. I call it twigology. Here's the twigology. Here's the annular, here's the bud scar, the terminal bud. This is a linden. So I have a terminal bud here. Here's the bud scale scars forming for the next season. But note, look on here. You got in your mind where the previous ones were? Here's the previous year. There's the previous year, the year before that, and the year before that. So if you're telling me that a linden in 4 years is going to put out a little over 4 inches, no matter what is being said, oh, I take care of this tree, I love this tree, this so there is something going wrong with that tree. That is not normal. So the plant can dictate to us what is going on. Then we get to the point you say, okay, even though it's in the bed, it gets water all the time, blah, blah, blah. The realities are the growth is not suggesting that. I would suggest 6 to 8 inches is normal for linden, and based on each species is different, as well as, is it a young immature tree or is it a mature tree? So we get down to, what do we exactly see? For example, does this leaf, do these symptoms on this leaf look like these symptoms? I hope you say no. Notice interveinal necrosis, dead tissue between the veins, versus this necrosis appears to follow the veins. This one is called physiological leaf scorch, literally not enough water being moved in to control the leaf. Physiological leaf scorch, and this is maple anthracnose. We also have people call in and say, oh, my tree's yellow, my conifer's going yellow. Well, you got to be careful. This is a conifer that's yellowing. And note, what do you see? It's yellowing overall. Versus this, which is very common with white pines. White pines, 5 needles in a cluster. White pines every year will drop the 2-year-old needles. Look, here's this season's needles. The older needles, this is normal. This is perfectly normal. But when you hear, oh, my conifer's yellowing, does this come to your mind? Or is this coming to your mind? So this is where we have to fight our own biases. And we typically correct that by saying, hey, can you bring me in a sample? Because if it's like this, you've got the green tip, that's typically normal. That typically happens in September, perfectly normal, no big deal. There's a problem going on with this tree over here. So here you go. What exactly do you see? What's going on? Typically somebody says, well, there's holes in my hosta. Well, immediately in your mind, what are you thinking? Oh, holes in my hosta. I know what that is. Holes in the middle of the leaf. Oh, that's got to be slugs. Well, is it? Is this slug damage? But what you're hearing, somebody saying, I got holes in my leaves. Well, look carefully. Look carefully, because what exactly do you see? Where's the damage? Note, the damage is here in the middle in this variegated part. Variegated, it's variegated, it lacks chlorophyll. And note, all of the damage is in the same place on the plant. So you have to teach yourself to see things. Why is that there? Lack of chlorophyll? What do you also know about this plant, this lily, this plantain lily, hosta? Where do hosta lilies go? They should be growing in the shade. This is clearly out in the sun. You're actually getting bleaching of the chlorophyll here. It's in the full sun. And where you have a lack of chlorophyll in the leaves, the tissue is literally burning up, drying up, and dropping out. When somebody says, oh, holes in my leaf, this is slug damage. Up on the edges, in the middle of the leaf, starting nowhere, not on the edge, this is classically slug damage. Slugs, leopard slugs, they love cool, damp, moist places, tend to be one of the big predators, one of the big problems with hostas. Same with the hostas. Somebody says, well, now I've got holes on the leaves. You have to learn at where, how? Explain to me. Because these are on the edges of the leaf. note almost like notched out here, which are classic symptoms of the black vine weevil. Here's the grub, here's the pupae, here's the large adult, the black vine weevil that causes this notching on the edges of the leaves. No real clear pattern, but it feeds on the edge of the leaves. What about this? You're saying, oh my gosh, that looks like somebody took a hole punch. It's possible, but this is actually leafcutter bee. Leafcutters coming in here, cutting these almost circles out, taking it back, lay it, they put that, punch it down the middle of like the center of a twig that's hollow. They use that hollow twig as a chamber for their young. They push that leaf in there, they put a little pollen in there, they put an egg in there, they bring another one and cover it up. So what do you see here? You see this kind of raggedness, this tear? That's what does that. This is a browser. Deer don't have a set pair of teeth above, upper and lower. So when they grab something, they grab it mainly with their bottom teeth. They don't have much upper teeth, but they don't bite it to cut it. They actually kind of grab and pull. So instead of getting clean cuts, you end up with this tearing, this ragged tear from the damage, whether it's twigs. Again, you see where they literally grab it, pull, bend, and try to rip it off. Here it is on white pine that they've created damage. But what do you see here? Note, 45-degree angle. This is a nice clean cut. That suggests something rather than the ragged tears from being pulled by this the deer, which is a browser. So here we got a nice clean cut. Here we have almost looks like little chisel marks, two little chisel marks on this. This goes up about 3 or 4 feet up the tree. You're saying, what? Huh? How about this? This is 4.5 feet up in the air. Well, this is due to, here's the marks, a rabbit. You say, how do they get that high? Well, remember, when snow builds up, rabbits just sit on top, ride that up, and just keep feeding wherever they want to feed. What exactly do you see? Bark's coming off. All right, bark's coming off. Where? How? Say down here at the base. Deer? Is that being ripped off? What, deer rub, buck rub? Well, that's good, could be down here. This is 15 feet up in the air. Gray squirrel, I've watched them. You see this little strip hanging here? As well as here, see these strips hanging? That's kind of key. The squirrel will grab it at the bottom and literally hold on to it and tug and pull these strips off. Even though you say, oh, it's a treat. Well, their squirrel looks a little different. There's something a little different about this squirrel. So, next questions. What do you see on other plants? What's the sight? Step back, look around, because we want to know what's going on. If you see something such as this planting, here's daylilies, here's, I kid you not, these are someone put in dogwoods. Think about the site, dogwoods here, and some arborvitae. All of these appear to be suffering. So we want to look around, same species, different species, same symptoms, different symptoms. We've got a lot of, for example, we have climbing roses. The guy asked us, he said, we got something going on here. I can't figure this out. Climbing roses, hybrid tea roses, even short, what's going on? They're all having this symptom of, look at the new growth. New growth is twisted, yellow. Things are not looking good. This, we call this strapping. These are classic symptoms of growth regulator herbicide damage that caused this. Whenever we have symptoms that are across different species, same symptoms on different plants, different species, but they all have the same symptoms. It's something we did as humans. That's a man-created thing. Man, humankind created thing. Here's another one. Oh, this has to be Roundup injury, because this farmer's out here, he's got his soybean fields, all these plants that are all suddenly dying now. They're being killed by him. We have to be careful because we have to tease these things apart. We have to really see what's going on. Is that a possibility? If it were, I would expect grass kill along here. When asked, he said, oh, I have these, we've had these on ever since I bought these trees and they were really expensive. I kept this tile on them, these plastic tile, to cover up and protect the trunk. Well, we went up and pulled that off. Look what happened. That had created the perfect environment for meadow voles and mice to get in there and feed at the base of the trunk. So we have to be careful. We also look at the site, the key characteristics. Understand our soils. We will deal with clay differently than we will deal with sand, which will be different than how we deal with silt. And that mixture, sand, silt, and clay, is the mixture ultimately that makes our soils. Understanding soil pH also. 7 is neutral, below 7 is acid, above is basic or alkaline. Most of our nutrients are most readily available between 6 and 7. So most of our soils average here. Plants have their own preferences where they want to be. But if we try to push them one way or the other, typically they will not respond well. And note, pin oaks above 7.5 pH, almost guaranteed you're going to have chlorosis, a lack of chlorophyll in those leaves. 9 and 10, who knows about the plants? And when did the symptoms first appear? And we have to be careful because most people say, it suddenly showed up overnight. That's not true. Here's one. We were sitting here looking at this. Landscape crew said, we can't figure out what's going on, what's killing this. And interestingly enough, there was a person down here who said, well, I know what's going on. I've watched these all day. This is where my window is, down over here in the building. We said, yeah, what is it? She said, when they were cleaning the concrete columns, the acid wash that they were using to clean these bounced off and fell. What about this? People say, oh, I have spots in my lawn. Well, spots is a really broad term. This spot is this disease. Is it insect? Well, typically by stepping back and looking, dog also. We've got a problem. You have dog urine can create these spots. Things such as powdery mildew. For some plants, it's not a big deal, but for other plants, it creates definite issues. All of these symptoms that you see here are all symptoms due to powdery mildew. The reddening, this mycelia, this white mycelia. But over time, this is young, this is a little bit older, this is more mature on these leaves, where you start to get this browning and tissue death because the lack of sunlight shutting down the function of those cells. Our next series, what is the horticultural history? What is the environmental history? And what does the client think the problem is? We're trying to figure out what's happened. People say, well, when we had to excavate the soil out of here, but we did so very carefully. We made sure not to damage the tree roots. Well, I got to tell you, if you excavate 4 or 6 inches of soil, 90% of the upper 80% of the tree roots are in the 6 to 8 inches of soil. You damage some tree roots here. What about things like this? Building new homes, they want to make sure they get the trees in for mature trees. Wow, they're not even finished with actually literally finishing the flow, the landscape itself, the lawn, but yet they've got a tree planted already because look, you can see the little bag, the little gator bag on it to water it to make sure it's not stressed. We do crazy things. Sometimes horticultural history is obvious. Here was a group of people sitting under this tree in shade and they loved it. And then a week later, when going by, wow, what happened? I had to stop and ask. I stopped and asked, and they said, well, a guy told us that we really shouldn't be sitting under the tree because these trees are really weak. So they pruned it back. Wow, that's obvious. There's problems. As well as this. Sidewalks were cut out, sidewalks created when this was a young tree, as well as this. But it's time to call this a problem and get rid of it. Fully half of that trunk is non-functional because it's cut off from the ground. What about this? This used to be a gravel path. The tree was here, but I guess it was unsafe. Therefore, they decided to asphalt it to make it safer. But that doesn't help the tree. Besides, in 10 years, who would have guessed the reason you have a crooked tree is because it was run over by a train. There's a lot of times some things are obvious. Sometimes the environmental history can be a little tricky too. This was a development that there was this oak tree. They got access in this area and they decided they were going to build a development back behind it called the Lone Oak. It was the Lone Oak development. And this is a beautiful oak tree. Well, after 2 or 3 years, they called me out. This road was not here. And this is what they looked like, but look at the amount of area they left for tree roots. So why is the tree dying? Suddenly, a lot of this environmental history becomes really important. Look at this, birch trees, downtown. They handled it. It was quite fascinating. These paper birch down here, Minnesota, right up against this building. We thought there's no way, but they were very careful about irrigation and how they took care of these trees. Look at this in Chicago. This is their tree box. They actually have good drainage areas for drainage, but here's their tree box for the trees to grow. That's pretty cool, but what was this filled with? Check this out. Notice how half the tree is growing. Well, if you take a guess, which side gets most of the light for this parking area? And this clearly, I mean, looking at this beautiful old tree, the horticultural history, it was clear that at one time this parking lot wasn't here. They needed more parking. Therefore, they created the parking lot. Look at the difference between this tree that still has an area for roots. This one has been totally enclosed. So the history is sometimes you got to tease apart. What can we do? Pray about it, grin and bear it. Well, you want to make the client part of your diagnostic part. In the interview, you're talking to them. It's not an interrogation. The goal is to gather more information. You don't want to use these leading questions. Did you give the plant too much fertilizer? Did you give the plant too much water? Even if they did, they would never say yes. They've always done the perfect thing. So instead, you ask questions that generate dialogue, not with yes or no answers. Tell me, how often did you water your plants? How long did it take? So you ask those open-ended questions, and a partner is more likely to follow through with recommendations. So how do you take samples? What diagnostic tools are useful? What additional resources are available? How do you take samples? We want to expand our horizons. So with these tools, classically a hand lens, got to have a hand lens. Also have to have a knife for autopsies. Anytime you get a sample, start carving on it. You need a knife. If you don't like knives, you can use hand pruners for cutting samples, taking samples, bringing samples in, looking at them, examining them. So these are excellent tools for diagnostics. Even cameras now, we can take pictures and send them around to others saying, hey, I don't quite understand what's going on here. Can you help me out? We also have soil testing. Oh, what a great tool. What a fantastic tool. Is this soil, are the nutrients in the soil even there available for the plants? We also have a diagnostic clinic, an excellent diagnostic clinic, the C. Wayne Ellett Plant Pest Diagnostic Clinic, that can do all kinds of tests to help us determine what is going on diagnostically. We seek professional help, such as here's Joe talking with Mother Teresa, seeking professional help. So what tools do we have? Hand lens, cutting tools. But one of the great tools that I carry around with me is a soil probe. Somebody says, well, I water them, I'm so careful how I water. Well, you can take that soil probe, push it down on the ground and find out literally how they're doing, what they're doing, how far down when they're irrigating, how far that is wetting down, is it even getting to the roots? And it tells you, if you can't push that in, you have compaction issues, you have multiple issues. So a soil probe is a great tool. Again, our hand pruners, fantastic. And ultimately, the ultimate tool for if there's a problem that doesn't seem to be resolvable, maybe the best is a basal pruning cut to move forward on it. So what other tools are available, resources available to you? Your experience, your own, or those in your own master gardening class, your colleagues, books, websites. Always use .edu websites. Those are much better than the .coms or others of Joe's Lab or Joe's Diagnostics. Use EDU sites to help you out. Seminars like this one, workshops. We try to always have diagnostic workshops because helping you, the more senses you can combine and get answers about plant samples, the better off you'll be, as well as soil testing labs and plant clinics. So how do you take samples? You got to understand garbage in, garbage out. If you don't take a good sample, the only thing the lab will most likely tell you is that was a dead brown stick. You don't want that. You need to know how to take one. Depends on if you're doing leaves or stems, twigs or branches, or live specimens. But what you're always looking for is that transition zone, the zone where there's dead tissue and live tissue. That transition of where this part of the plant appears to be okay, this one appears to be affected by this. We want that transition zone. From there, they will can culture out many of the issues, diseases that are going on. Shipping it, if you're going to ship it, don't use plastic bags, use paper bags. Plants are alive. Send it on a Monday morning, not a Friday afternoon, because by the time it gets there on Monday morning or Tuesday, it'll be crispy crittered. All right, the real question is now, what else? What did I miss? It's the first reality check. Here we are. This is one of our sites that we were at, June 2005. These are ash trees, and they look pretty decent here. But note the sequence. 2006, 2007, we're seeing a reduction in crown size. We're seeing branch death. We're seeing this epicormic shoots. We see actual almost total tree death here. You got in your mind what it is? All right. This is due to the native ash clearwing borer. This native clearwing moth so utilized these trees under stress because all around the base of these trees, these are frass pellets from this clearwing moth larvae feeding and pushing them out. Here they are, as well as the round holes. These are classic round holes from our native ash borer. And we also have the pupal skin from where once they have these trees infested, they go in, feed under the bark, cut that vascular tissue. Over time, they literally killed the tree. So it's not, you probably jump to, oh, emerald ash borer. Well, remember symptoms, we've got to look for the clues. Things like this, so we put a new one in there. Where's it going to get all of its nutrients? Where is it going to get all the water? The overarching problem, poor planting sites. Moment of truth, you're putting it all together. What's your diagnosis? What's the significance of the problem? What are your recommendations? Things like this. We have oak plum gall. Well, that looks pretty impressive. It could be, you're saying, what about oak leaf blister? It's all over all of our oaks. No big deal. Oak plum gall, no big deal. Once you have your decision made, Gandoderma, however, is a big deal. Once you see these shelf fungi, this Gandoderma species, which are tree, what they do is they will actually begin to break down the lignin and the cellulose in those tree roots. So they begin to destroy the structural integrity of our of trees, especially oaks, most of our hardwoods. There's even other species that work on conifers. But once you start to see these shelf fungi, these wood decaying fungi, this is something that we need to be very aware of and understand it can be a problem. So the decisions made, options, do you correct it? Is it even needed? For example, we have oak clustered midrib galls by a wasp. We have elm bladder galls created by an aphid. Aphids are inside here, the young wasps are in here. We have cypress twig gall created by a midge fly is feeding. We have cedar apple rust. This is an impressive disease, but these are all obvious, but not significant. Not things people have to worry about. Gandoderma, you worry about. All of these we get excited about, but we don't too often have to worry about them. So your first opportunity, what's your diagnosis? Bird flu strikes a Florida birthday party. How about this? Don't use bleach when you run a peacock through a washing machine. That just doesn't work. What about the 21st question? We didn't talk about this, but the 21st question of plant diagnostics is, what if we're wrong? Well, it is more often than not, plants are rarely killed outright first year or otherwise. If we're wrong, we step back and take a look. Don't panic. Maintain your perspective. Is this a really small cart or is this a really big man? We need to maintain our perspective. A great read, if you want to, it's called On Being Wrong. It's Adventures in the Margin of Error by Catherine Schultz. And Catherine Schultz has studied our intents. The kinds of things that we can make mistakes about are essentially unlimited in number. And Catherine had actually said, if we're not making mistakes at least half of the time, we are not making enough decisions in our lives. And when we finally realize we're wrong, we want to fall into a hole in the ground or we want to disappear. We want to die. We're ashamed by being wrong. That's crazy. We often feel that really intense wave of kind of shame and horror that we made a mistake. Well, with plants, she recommends not just accepting our mistakes, but embracing them. Be willing to make the mistakes because then once you learn, hey, I guarantee you will never forget that again. And you will be the expert in that aspect. Mark Twain quipped, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know that for sure that just ain't so. Sherlock Holmes, the diagnostic process. We'll finish up here. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip. After a good meal and a bottle of wine, they lay down for the night and went to sleep. Some hours later, Holmes awoke and nudged his faithful friend, Watson. Watson, he said, Sherlock, look up the sky and tell me what you see. Watson replied, I see millions and millions of stars. Holmes asked him, what does that tell you? Well, Holmes had been tired of being the kind of the brunt of the joke. And so he said, you know what? This time I'm going to let Sherlock share what I know and see. So he pondered a bit, replied, astronomically, it tells me there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, I deduce that the time is approximately 3:15. Theologically, I can see that God is all powerful and that we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, I suspect that we will have a beautiful day tomorrow. He's feeling pretty good about it. Says, I think I got this down. I think Holmes is really going to be impressed, Sherlock Holmes. So Watson concludes, so Holmes, what does it tell you? Holmes thought a minute and he said, Watson, you idiot, someone has stolen our tent. Don't get so caught up in the process that we often miss certain things. Be willing to make mistakes. It's all right. Rarely will something die overnight instantaneously. So be willing to make those mistakes. Be willing to put that out there and enjoy it. Have fun. The only way you'll get any better is by making those mistakes. And that's the end of it.